Just last week, I recorded an episode of the Fateless podcast with these three gentlemen right here. This is Sham, Simon, and Brad from Fateless Gaming. And I got to ask them questions about their first game, which is entitled GODFORGE. Now, this was a cool new experience for me. I'd never been on a podcast before. We also just had a fun, wide-ranging conversation talking about everything from gaming to game development to GODFORGE itself. One question I got to ask them point blank was how they foresee spending and free-to-play happening within GODFORGE, and I think their answer to that question will intrigue a lot of you. So if you want to check out the episode, I will try to include a link in the description of my video, but you can also go to the Fateless YouTube channel and find it there. Now, while I was recording the episode, I struck up a conversation with a gentleman on the right. That is Brad. Some of you may know him as Chosen, a longtime raid content creator. Now, Chosen kind of shut down his channel and retired from content creation around the time I started, so I never got to do a collab with him, which was always disappointing to me because the very first raid video I watched was a Chosen video. So while I was doing the podcast, I asked Brad if he would come on the channel just to chat, and he very graciously agreed. And so in today's episode, I'm going to present to you my collab / interview with Brad / Chosen, and I'm pretty excited for it, so I hope you enjoy. I am Colred. This is Colred Plays. Let's get started. Hey folks, Colred here, and with me a special guest. This is Brad from the Fateless team, aka Chosen, longtime raid content creator. Thanks for being on the channel, man.
Hey, what's good? What's good, Colred? It's good to be here. It's fun to be back in the swing again, doing videos. It's been a while.
Yeah, and I just did the Fateless podcast. You're the host of the Fateless podcast. Now here you are doing a video. Does it feel like like riding a bike? Like you just jump back on the thing and your instincts kick in and content creation is easy for you, or does it feel like a step back in time?
Yeah, no, I mean it's at this point because I've been doing YouTube videos since like 2008. So I used to get nervous or be uncomfortable, but now it's just like if we were hanging out at my place, it doesn't bother me at all. I've done thousands of videos at this point. It's fine.
All right, awesome. So now you stopped your raid channel about 6 months ago, right? And you've been working with the Fateless crew ever since. So for those of my viewers who maybe aren't as familiar with your channel, why don't you give a little bit of a background? First of all, maybe how you got into content creation, what you were doing with raid, and when and why you decided to move on to Fateless. I know that's a lot to cover, but let's just start there.
It's all good. It's all good. Yeah, so I started a long time ago in content in 2008, and originally I was in the StarCraft community, and back then there was really no one able to produce videos or upload things very well, and so there wasn't any games getting casted. So I was like, you know what? There's some great players playing games, and there's some awesome matches. I'm just gonna cast them and throw them on YouTube, and it did semi well. I mean, back then YouTube was really small. Getting 500 views was a good video, but yeah. So I that's how I got started, just uploading random StarCraft matches and being in the RTS community, and then kind of evolved into Diablo 3 and Overwatch and some other games. Never anything crazy, just kind of small, middling channels and content, doing my thing, and then got into raid at kind of the beginning, and got kind of lucky being in the right place at the right time, and had some content do fairly well, and then it was kind of off the races, and I quit my job and went all in with it, and did that for a few years, and then once I kind of ran my course doing raid content and did the thousands of videos and kind of ran out of ideas, I was lucky enough to have some good friends from the raid community like Hell Hades and some of the crew that he works with, and there was a new opportunity with Fateless, so jumped on that about a year ago, and here we are.
That's awesome. And so, this is something that I get comments sometimes in my video, or I get questions in my Discord about content creation and like how to get into it, where to start, and all of those things. And it sounds like, your story is sort of the classic story, right? And you just had an idea. Like there was an idea, there was something missing that you wanted to see, and so you decided to produce it with the casting for StarCraft. And that sounds like a really cool little origin story. Is there a piece of advice that you would give, like out of sort of your experience with casting, with content creation and videos and all that stuff with live streaming? Is there Is there like an easier entry for somebody who's starting out with content creation? Would you recommend videos, podcasting, live streaming, a mix of all of those, or what would be your one piece of advice for somebody starting?
Sure. The advice is actually radically different than what it would have been a few years ago. The industry has evolved a lot in the last 5 years. Like the old school advice would have been just get started, like just be consistent, just get out there, hone your skills, get better on camera, and just kind of start growing slowly. But now I think with the popularity of gaming and content and a lot more stuff being out there, my advice would be like find why a viewer would want your content. Like what role are you filling? It's not probably not ideal to just be like, oh, I'm just gonna get started. I'm just gonna do stuff. You got to kind of go into it with a plan and kind of what niche are you filling, and why would viewers seek out your content compared to the billions of other videos that are out there on the like what market share are you filling?
Yeah, and that's interesting because that's how I approached it. I didn't just jump in. I said to myself, I'm looking at the raid content creation scene. It's fairly saturated at that point. You were still making videos at that point, and a lot of big hitters. But I thought there was a niche for me, and that I'm an educator, and I felt like I could add some depth in terms of educating new players because it's a complicated game, and it didn't feel like that ground was fully covered. And so that's what I went in with. But I do feel like there's also, things can evolve over time because I know watching your channel over time that what you were doing year 1 and year 2 in raid content creation was very different than what you were doing in year 4 and 5, correct?
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it evolved a lot. Like it evolved into a little bit like back in the day, back in 2017, 2018, 2019, it was a little bit slower. It was more of a presentation, more of a conversation, more of a personal connection. Yeah, and nowadays it's more algorithmic. It's more about like the retention rates and the click-through rates and the data and the YouTube algorithm. So you really gotta kind of get in there with good thumbnails and good titles and good retention in the first minute. So it's definitely evolved into a little bit more of a game centered on that. But like at the end of the day, if you make good content and you like what you're doing, that's gonna come through to viewers and you'll be successful if you work hard. So it's still a lot of the same formulas. It just evolved a little bit.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'm curious because to the viewers who don't know, Brad is the host of the Fateless podcast. I know you do other things at Fateless as well in terms of game design and all that, but you host the Fateless podcast. Have your lessons, like the lessons you learned as a content creator, has that served you in being the host of the podcast? Do you feel like you're able to do a good podcast based on your experience as a content creator, or is it something that you're still learning on the fly and getting better at?
Yeah, it's something that you never feel like you're where you should be yet. You always feel like, gosh, I could have done better there. I could have asked better questions. So I'm definitely no expert, but yeah, I'm definitely way better or more equipped to do it now than I would have been 5, 6 years ago for sure.
Yeah.
So still definitely trying to learn and improve, and mainly my job over at the Fateless podcast is just to kind of facilitate conversation and make sure the guests and the Fateless team are on the same page, show up at the same time, and all that. And then I just kind of let it rip and let people have fun with it. So I don't have too difficult of a job there on that task.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed being on the podcast. I think one of the things about the podcast that is maybe, like from my perspective, would be the most appealing as a content creator and as a gamer that, I mean, I know that you've played a lot of different types of games in your gaming career, is just to get to talk to other gamers like about gaming, because content creation is kind of a lonely game, right? It's like you're basically working for yourself. Maybe you have an editor or an artist, maybe, but a lot of people do it on their own. They do their own editing, they do their own thumbnails. And so you don't have a lot of people to necessarily talk to, like talk shop. You know what I mean? I have a Discord community. I can always talk to people about Raid and sometimes other games as well. But I think that was the cool thing for me to see, like to see Sham from the game developer kind of space, Hell Hades from the content creation space, and also the game development, you from that in the podcast. So we like you kind of nerd out, right? You get to talk gaming, you get to talk like content creation, you do all that stuff. Do you just have a lot of fun talking to the guys about whatever? Like, do you get sidetracked a lot and you have to like refocus on GODFORGE, or is it just no, you're so passionate about it, like that's where all the conversations go naturally anyway?
Yeah, for sure. It even happens sometimes in like our meetings. We'll be sitting here working on game design, and all of a sudden we're talking about something else, and we're just chopping it up. And you actually bring up a good point, that a lot of people don't really realize is that the career as a content creator, it's definitely a little bit different in the fact that you can't really, like, no one understands, like you can't like talk to your parents about content creation because they're just gonna be like, hey, as long as you're happy and you're paying your bills, good for you. But
Right.
they don't understand, like, whereas if you have a normal 9 to 5, they're like, other people are going to get it, and you're gonna be able to talk with them. So
Yeah.
really, the online community and the people you game with a lot of times is really your only way to kind of communicate and vent and discuss issues, because everyone else is going to be a little bit clueless, to no fault of their own, because it is kind of
Right.
a separate thing that most people don't do.
Right. Um, so I'm curious because like I'm excited about GODFORGE. I'm just pumped about GODFORGE. I like the idea of gamers getting into game development. I like the idea of content creators getting into game development because it feels like you and Hell Hades and YST and Ivy League Gaming and all the people that are part of the team. Like you've lived our life. What we experience day to day with Raid, with other games. How often is that perspective part of the conversation? Like how much of it directs the conversation? Because I imagine moving over to the game development side, you're now starting to see it from the other angle as well. So if you like had to kind of put a percentage on it, how much of the discussion do you think focuses on like your previous life as a content creator and gamer and your current like life as part of a game development team that's trying to make a financially viable game?
Yeah, I've been kind of predicting for years that we were going to see a renaissance in the gaming industry of it getting back to its roots of gamers and content creators really being the ones who produce games, because the gaming industry got kind of overthrown there for a little bit by business people and corporations trying to, they kind of saw how much money is in the industry, and they were like, hey, why don't we capitalize on that?
Right.
And what happened is they got kind of out of touch with what gamers want and what resonates. And so now you're seeing, like back in the day, back in the 90s, 2000s, and 2010s or whatever, the older generations that were kind of on the business side of these high positions that are in their 50s and 60s, they didn't grow up gamers and content
Right.
creators. Now we're starting to see some people in their 30s and 40s and 50s that grew up as gamers and content creators, and they're going to start getting into the industry. So I do think you're going to see a lot more versions of things like GODFORGE coming out in the next decade of the industry kind of evolving in that regard, for sure. And I think you had a second part to your question, but I rambled for too long and I don't remember now.
um no, I guess just how much of the game development part of your job do you feel like I guess maybe I'll reframe the question. What do you think is the greatest advantage of coming from the background that a lot of the team has come from in terms of being gamers and being content creators, growing up gamers? Where do you think in the room that actually fits in? Like, do you have a story or just like an impression of how that benefits the development of Godford?
It's probably the most in like the quality of life type features that you want in a game. Because you really can't get the perspective of that if you haven't been in it. If you haven't played thousands of hours and kind of like what the annoying things are and what the good things are throughout all sorts of different games in the industry. If you just come into it, as a business person who wants to make money, and you're not truly a gamer, you're not going to hit those notes. You're not going to understand
Right.
the different things that get activated within the player base based on what features they're going to want or not want. So when we're in our meetings and we basically have everybody who's got a background in gaming, it really helps, because the conversations can be so fast because everybody gets it, and
Yeah.
everybody can kind of instantly tell what's a good idea and what's a bad idea. So hopefully, our job is to implement those as good as possible. But I think we're hoping it'll be good anyway.
Yeah, me too. Sticking with that kind of idea, being in the room, having that conversations and the conversations going quickly. Do you have an example or a story about maybe an idea that you were part of developing? Maybe something you could share. Obviously, you're still in development, but like how that riffing happens in the room.
Oof. Yeah, I mean, so the constant ideas being tossed around. And yeah, I probably should let Simon leak the features, because I don't want to step on anybody's toes or anything. But like in a few months, I'll obviously be able to refer back and tell
Right,
you like
right.
this is exactly how this idea grew. This is exactly where this came from and all of that. But there's going to be, I guess one thing we've talked about would be like um, better integration of clusters within our game. That's something we really want to do. You know, people they're
Clan
in a
clusters.
clan.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. They're in a clan, and sometimes that's not good enough. It's like I don't just play with 20 or 30 people. Like
Right.
we're on Discord, we got hundreds of people. So that's something that really comes through from our experience playing games. It's like, can we evolve this industry in some way where we do kind of integrate a better system to let clans work together and have alliances and have clusters?
Right.
Can we actually integrate that within our game instead of forcing people to a third party app?
Yeah. No, that seems like something that, again, the gamer background would definitely help with. I so I've watched a bunch of the Fateless podcasts, and like I have so many questions about what's going on in the room. Like I have so many questions, and I kind of get limited access to Simon a little bit, or to you a little bit, or some of the other members who I've talked to for like collabs and stuff like that. But one of the things that I really enjoy about the podcast is like there's a real team feel to everybody who comes on the podcast. It seems to be a very positive space and work environment. People are passionate about it. And I know that even like comes out in the humor. Like there's the whole thing about, Robin Hood. Like, right? It's like you're trying to get Robin Hood in the game. Is that really like an American versus UK kind of thing? Or is that just sort of a joke for the podcast? Like, how is that playing out in the room? Is it an everyday thing, or is it just every once in a while you just poke Simon and you'd be like, we got to get Robin Hood in this game?
Yeah, no, the we have a great work environment, and a lot of us are friends and chop it up. So yeah, no, it's always in good fun. I mean, I was maybe the first person that got hired at Fateless. They had like their inner like founders crew, and then
Right.
I kind of came in the early days. I mean, I can count on one hand the amount of times that there was like truly an argument.
Mm.
Like it's very rare. It's usually a very good environment, and even if we are arguing about a feature or something, it always goes super well. It's
Right.
always everyone's got good ideas to bring to the table, and it gets ironed out pretty quickly. So yeah, but like I was friends with Simon for years and did tons of collabs, and a lot of us knew each other for years. So it was a pretty seamless transition to kind of just start on working with everything.
And about Robin Hood, does he get
Let's
really
go back to
irritated
Robin Hood.
or
Yeah, it is funny because like the different perceptions that people can have based on where they grew up and
right.
and how they experience media.
Yeah.
But like to me, Robin Hood's a badass.
Yeah.
Like he's this amazing fighter who can win archery tournaments at the snap of a finger. Who's like stealing from the rich and trying to help the working class. But then they view Robin Hood as like a meme, like he's a
Right.
joke. It's like this guy in tights, and like it's a cartoon of a meme. So it's just kind of funny that that like that's the two interpretations of like what he would be in our game.
What do you think are the chances that he's actually going to make it into the game?
I like I don't know. At some point, I'm sure he'll be in there. Will he be launch or some event down the road or years in or something or maybe not at all? But I would guess he'll be in the game at some point.
You ask that question at the end of every podcast. You ask your guest what champion, what figure from mythology needs to be included. What are some of the coolest ideas that you think you've heard from your guests that might actually make it into the game?
Um,
Like, not again, you
yeah,
can't leak everything.
yeah.
Yeah, so but let me rephrase. Which ones would you hope would make it into the game in the future?
I cannot confirm or deny, obviously, but I liked Papa Drock. He's a raid creator.
Yeah,
He came on the podcast and said William Wallace, and I
yeah,
was like, yeah, I was like, that's perfect. Like that would be so cool for like a GODFORGE type of game, like a medieval warfare dark fantasy. You get this big legendary William Wallace swinging around a great sword. That was a great suggestion. And then like for me, like if I were on the Fateless podcast, ask that question. I've always been a big fan of like the medieval warfare sword and board. I would love someone like Achilles to be in the
Yeah.
game. I've always been kind of into those medieval hero warrior types, or even from like Vinland Saga, like the
Hmm.
Viking saga. Some of those like Thorkel and a bunch of those epic heroes from things like that would be super cool. Would be kind of like the way I would go.
And obviously, you have those factions in the game already. They're in Godforge, right? So you have like a Greek faction, you have a Norse faction. So just like Raid, you're going to be releasing new characters down the line, and they're going to have to fit into the factions that you currently have. So there's certainly fertile ground for some of those champions to make it into the game. It's pretty
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. A lot of people think that we're gonna run out of heroes, and it's actually the opposite problem.
Right.
Like we're gonna have heroes in the game, and people are gonna be like, "How is this person not a legendary?" And it's
Yeah.
like all of these legends are super cool. We can't make everybody a legendary. Like,
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I imagine like staying on that sort of theme. Like this is a challenge for you guys, right? To anticipate how people are going to react to the champions, and you need that reaction to be as positive as possible, especially at launch. But you also have to balance like the gameplay. The gameplay has to be satisfying as well. So somebody might love, a hero from antiquity, but realistically, they're going to be a rare or they're going to be an epic, at best. And some people are going to be upset about that. But in order for the gameplay to work, you have to have commons, uncommons, rares, epics, legendaries. Um, so thinking about that kind of thing, is there something that's happened maybe in the development process that prior to joining the crew and doing this, because you don't have a background in game development, so this is like your first foray into game development. Is there something about this process that has been completely surprising to you that you didn't really anticipate as a gamer or as a content creator?
it's a really good question. I wouldn't say anything has really struck me as like, damn, I wasn't expecting that. I would say it's a lot more work than what you would think, and there's a lot more. Like I thought it would be like, oh, I just get to design kits for heroes and it's gonna be fun, but like no, you got to know like how it's coded and why it's going to work and what it's going to clash with in terms
Right.
of abilities from other heroes. So there's really a lot to consider, and a lot of like the small minutia that you don't notice as a gamer. You start to learn when you get into the weeds of design, because you're like, that's why Raid had to do this ability like this, because it
Right.
would bug or it wouldn't work if they did it this way. So and like having an understanding of how an ability is going to be coded and implemented was a little bit of a step I didn't anticipate in terms of getting into design. That was a little bit of a thing I had to learn, but it wasn't like a shocker or a deal breaker or anything too crazy. It's just a little bit of work to learn that side of it.
I Speaking of like that part of it, your bio on the Fateless website, it says, community and then game design. That's kind of vague to us who are not in the game design field. We don't know exactly what it is that you guys do on a daily basis. So in terms of like game design elements or game design contribution, like what does your role feel like to you in terms of within the team? Like are you the guy creating ideas? Are you the guy, like playing devil's advocate? Are you the guy who's talking about themes? Are you the guy who's like getting involved with the coders and figuring out solutions? Or something completely different? What do you feel like your role within the team is from a game design standpoint?
Yeah, right now, and the reason mine was a little bit vague is because, like I said, I was one of the first ones to come on.
Right.
So back in the inception of Fateless, we kind of all wore multiple hats, and we were all doing a bunch of different things to kind of help lay the foundation. But now my job is mostly 75 to 80% game design. And right now, kind of like my main day-to-day work job or whatever, 9 to 5, would be researching, lore and mythologies, and what would be a good way to bring that into our world that we're building within our game.
Yeah.
So, like how would it make sense in terms of abilities and a kit, in a way where it doesn't feel silly to the player, where they're like, wait, what do Zeus is doing this? Like what?
Right. Right.
So, like that's my main job is kind of researching to make sure we can implement heroes in a way that makes sense in our universe, that'll be intuitive for players to understand. Like, okay, yeah, William Wallace has a big great sword, and he's got the blue face paint, and he's swinging around, instead of William Wallace being like a fire breathing mage or something.
Right, right. So do you suggest like skills and stuff like that as well, or is it more
Yeah.
just like thematic?
Yeah, no, I will usually come to the table with a suggestion of, hey, this hero I think should have this kit, and then that will kind of go through the filters there at Fateless, and I'll get feedback of like, hey, this is good, this is cool, or hey, I would change this, or hey, this is a little bit too weak or too strong, and then it'll kind of go through the filters that we have in place, and then I'll kind of do another version of it
Gotcha.
and resubmit it, and then obviously we're gonna have more steps of alpha testing and beta testing, and we're gonna have to sit here and try to figure out what's broken and what's too strong and all that. But yeah, that's kind of the is the main job right now. I'll come to the table with a kit, it gets reviewed, I redo the kit, and then we kind of go on to the next hero.
I've got two responses to that answer. First is, all right, folks, you know who to blame, right? This is the guy who's creating the character designs and the powers and all that stuff. I know there's a lot of people involved in it, but that's the second response is actually that feels really cool. Like from a gamer perspective, that's part of the dream, right? Is to literally do that kind of stuff, figure out things that make sense, systems that work that you would like to see in a game. I think we've all done that in our heads. We've all done that in our heads with games that we've played. Like all of us have sat around, thinking about how we would fix raid, and like you don't have to fix the game, you're building it from scratch, so you get to see your systems or your ideas implemented. Has a character that you've developed in that way been pretty like developed fairly far along in the game, and now you're getting to see gameplay as you move towards the beta? Like, are you seeing the characters like come to life and you're like, oh yeah, that was my idea from 6 months ago? Is that happening yet?
um I think it's just now starting to get to that point. Yeah. So, but there was so much foundation to lay that
Right.
not really. But it's just now starting to get to like, oh yeah, I named that skill that, and there's the icon they came up with, and oh yeah, okay, like this is how they're kind of running with that idea, because we'll kind of like tell the art team like, okay, this ability is going to be called this, and I envision it doing this,
Right.
and then we get to see what they come up with of like, oh, that's the animation, like, okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is really fun to see and be a part of that, so it's a cool process.
That's very cool.
And yeah, like you said, it's something we've all done. Like my mom has notebooks of mine when I was like 12,
Right.
and I was like designing Diablo 1 items,
Yeah.
like, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I personally, this is not something I've really talked about much on the channel, but a friend of mine and I, like 15 years ago, started a little indie game company for board games. And we developed two board games and we tried to publish them, and it kind of fell apart for us because we weren't really good with the mechanics of it. Like we came up with what we thought were fun games, but moving past that point takes a lot of know-how and a lot of effort, and we kind of, it died on the vine, I guess I would say. But I think we've all done that at some point, is we've designed a game in our head, and to actually see it come to life. I would imagine it's also a little bit scary, right? Like when you see something finally that you kind of had a hand in creating come to fruition, because if it doesn't feel the way you imagined it, you're like, there are a lot of other people who are also have input in what might feel like, oh, this was my initial idea. Um, and then maybe they've made it better. Maybe you feel like they've made it worse. Maybe you're not sure how it's going to work out. I mean, do you feel like that's the case, or is it just like there's so many cool ideas that every idea just keeps getting ramped up and gets better and better, as it gets put through the process?
Yeah, it's hard because you're always going to be biased with your own work and your own
Right.
team. You're always going to feel like, oh, we're doing great. But yeah, it's definitely a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
It's like this is our first game. So I mean, we see all the YouTube videos circulating about these games that come out, and they crash and burn, and they're horrible, and they get horrible reviews, and they lose money. And it's like, if that happens with our first game, like, it might be curtains. Like,
Right.
it's definitely a lot of pressure, and it's definitely, you don't want to mess it up. You want to at least, do good enough to sustain and have a chance at a future in a second game. So, uh, I like, like I said, everybody's gonna be biased, but I feel like the leadership at Fateless, the people like Hell Hades and the other people that are in place there, like the Shams, and they're all so good at their role and at managing things that I would be shocked if some like horrible product came out of their leadership. Just
Right.
everything I've seen from like how Hades, the website, the tools, and just kind of everything he's put his hand on. He's got a kind of a gift to see kind of what's needed and how to bring it to life successfully.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I've definitely said that on this channel before, where one of the reasons I'm so high on this project is because when you look at the Hell Hades website, like the quality of work they've done there with the optimizer, like these are not people who do things in a half-assed manner. They go whole hog and they bring considerable vision and expertise and teamwork to it. And so obviously Fateless is a much bigger project. And there are more moving parts, guess I would say. But if it at the base level, I think I can feel confident as like a consumer of games to think that this is going to be the best effort of this team and that they have a high ceiling. There is a high ceiling here. You never know what the basement's going to be, right? But there's a high ceiling here for this game, which I think we're excited about. Um, Speaking about, you were talking about like if this game succeeds, you've got a chance to potentially make more games in the future as a development company. But your role right now, right, is in the game design. You're doing a little bit of community stuff. Once the game launches, there's going to be, I'm assuming, a little bit less focus on game design. There'll still be some, obviously, new characters, new game content. How do you know what your role will be at launch, or are you kind of still in conversations with that, or do you not have you're not really focused on that? You're like, let's get the game out, and then I'll worry about that later.
Yeah, I'm assuming I'd be involved, for at least a while post launch. But yeah, that's something we'll have to kind of see how it goes and monitor. If I do a horrible job, I'll be replaced. Yeah, I don't I don't know. Well, hopefully not, but we'll see. It's just kind of wherever they need me. If they need me to work on GODFORGE for 5 years, that's what I'll do. If they need me to kind of get the game to launch and then move on to a different thing, I'm happy to be a team player and do that. So it's just kind of do my best and hope it works out, and we'll see. But there hasn't been like a confirmation yet, like hey, you're gonna be doing this for 10 years or anything.
Right, right.
We haven't gotten to that point yet. I'm assuming that'll come within like 6 months after launch, and we'll kind of see how it goes.
Well, I assume you're not going to do a horrible job because you had a very successful YouTube channel. You're doing great with the podcast. Obviously, they invited you. You're one of their first hires. They invited you for a reason. But all that being said, like, do you ever see your path going back towards content creation or community, or do you feel like that chapter is one that's written for you, and you're going to dive into this, like the game development, and see where that takes you, or is it still kind of you don't know? You'll just see how it goes.
My goal has always been to get into the gaming industry in terms of design and development, or competing in esports or running an esports team, or like my goal was always to get in that spot in some capacity within gaming, the business or the competition or the development. So as far as that, it's not really a concern of what I do. I'm just kind of ride with it and go with it, and I'm super excited to be there and get it done. I don't know if that answered your
No,
question
that's awesome.
or.
I mean, again, as a gamer, I feel like you guys are living the gamer dream right now, and I'm so happy for you, and I'm like so excited for the. I want this to succeed so badly for both for like me as a player. Like I want to experience the game and have a good game, because like you were mentioning earlier in our discussion, I believe there's a need for a revolution in game development. And I think we need to get game development back into the hands of gamers. Not that, not every one of us is suited to game development. I'm not saying that that's necessarily what I think I need to do. Like I said with my board games, like it kind of died on the vine. And part of the reason is, you need a lot of talent to pull something like this off. Um, But I
Well,
think
and there's other factors. There's other. It's
right,
not all like we've all failed at things.
right,
Like, and so sometimes you can do a good job and it just doesn't work out. Like
right.
it's how many how many great athletes they get injured or things just don't go their way and they never make it to the pros even though they have the potential. Or how many great musicians or actors or the list is endless. It
Yeah.
doesn't always work out. So when it does, it's definitely something to be thankful for.
Yeah, and that's true, but I also I would say that like success rarely happens just because of luck. Like if you do succeed, that means there have been a lot of talented, passionate people who have made it work.
Oh, yeah,
But
yeah, yeah, for sure. It's
right.
both. Yeah, it's
Right,
both.
it is
Yeah.
both. But I just think from a gamer's side, like I think we've all had our frustrations with Plarium. And this is not necessarily Plarium's fault. It is what the ecosystem currently is. Right? They are more a symptom than a cause of anything that I think we would say. And I think one of the ways for gaming to evolve in the next decade, like you mentioned, is for gamers to take the reign. And gamers often when you think about content creators, like they're gamers, they were gamers on the side, right? Like all of you had other careers. Like Hell Hades was in sales. The reason that he's good at what he does is not because he was a great gamer. It's because he was great at other things and he happened to be a gamer and he married the two. Right? And so I think that for me is like that's why I want to see this succeed because I think people are bringing in all these talents, but they're also passionate gamers and we can all benefit from that. And maybe it won't be a revolution, maybe it'll just be maybe it'll just be Fateless for now. Who knows? But maybe you guys succeed and you put out 10 games over the next 20 years and I'm going to play every single one of them if it works. So that's what I'm hoping for. But
There's lots of things that are going to be happening like that, and you're starting to see it more and more. Like it started back in the day with like what League of Legends, and then all of a sudden that blew up. And
that's true.
Path
Yeah.
of Exile, Path of Exile was what like 6 people originally, and then that
Warframe, same
blew up
thing.
into
Yeah.
yeah, and it, like Valheim, six people blew up, made like $300 million.
Yeah.
You're gonna see it kind of go back to a lot of those projects that are gamers who know what they're doing and they kind of step in and do it right.
Yeah. No, well, Brad, I really appreciate you coming here and talking to me today. Obviously, we have our podcast, our Fateless podcast episode that I think is coming out in the next day or two. So I'll include a link to that. Also include a link to your old channel because you have a lot of content on there that could still be valuable. But before we leave, is there any one thing maybe like if you were going to hype up GODFORGE, if there's one thing that you would be excited to tell players like this is in the game, this is something that you have to check out if you like this thing or that thing, like is there one game feature that you're super excited about? Maybe something that's already been told, like it's been shared already, so you don't have to leak anything. There's just something like as a gamer that you're really excited about in God.
Um, I'm really excited for I think one of the things we're really trying to innovate in with GODFORGE is like the ability for players to compete in a way where they don't have to like wail out like for people to be able to flex their muscles in terms of their knowledge and how much they know and how active they are and how well they can kind of manage the game. That's something that I feel we're going to be able to take the first step in innovating on in this genre. So I
That's
can't give
awesome.
you the specifics on it,
That's
but
awesome.
I think it's going to be exciting for people to see our ideas to innovate on that part of the this genre.
All right, well you heard it here. Going to be able to compete without wailing out. That's a huge thing. That's huge. I'm excited about that. Obviously, a lot of my viewers are free to play players. Again, I said this on the podcast. I'm also looking forward to being a spender in GODFORGE. Like the reason that I'm not a spender here in Raid is different, sometimes. And I'm also hoping that we find ways to spend, and I mentioned this on the podcast to Hell Hades, to find ways to spend and support the game without necessarily being pay to win, which is really cool. But it sounds like that's built into the DNA of this game, which is absolutely exciting. So, all right, Brad, thanks for being on the channel. Everybody, this is Chosen. Go check out the Fateless podcast. Go check out his channel. And yeah, thanks. That is it for me
All right. I
today.
tried to wave. I don't know if it was on camera or not.
That's good.
Can I get over far enough? Yeah, yeah.
There you go.
Thanks for having me, Colrad. It was a blast. And cheers, everybody.
All right. I have been Colred. This is Colred Plays. I'll see you in another video soon.